Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, this is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. I am glad to be here. It is 9:30 p.m. Wednesday night, Calgary, Alberta. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us. It's a 30-minute live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and I'm glad to be here and be able to continue to do these shows. And I appreciate everybody who's tuning in and who's listening and passing this on to their friends and other people. That's just great. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. And it's going to take all of us to stop child abuse, really, and all human rights abuses, right? Men, women, children. No one deserves to be abused in any way. And I especially, focus on and fight for child rights because children do not have a voice. They do not have the luxury of being able to protect themselves and to run away, to get away. These little children here that are suffering out here today and tonight, without our voice, they really have no one to stand up for them. And so that's why I'm doing these shows. So I'm glad you can join me, and I appreciate it. We're going to talk about it. We finished up Strengthening Families and Communities, 2010, a resource guide from childwelfare.gov. And pretty much we had finished up looking at that. That was a really great PDF download that anyone can get from childwelfare.gov. And I found another one that is just awesome. It's more updated information, really, than previously regarding child maltreatment, child neglect, and child abuse and whatnot. So I thought we'd take a look at that tonight. And there's some different stuff on there that I kind of wanted to take a look at. So I'm glad you can be here. And, I'm not a professional counselor or therapist. I'm just a person, private citizen who pays to do my own blog talk shows. I study child rights, human rights. I'm an advocate standing up for children against child abuse. And I'm in between courses at MRU here in Calgary. And so I figured, I just keep researching all the time. That's what I do. And so, I thought, well, when I find interesting stuff, I like to bring it out to people. I feel that abuse is not talked about enough, child abuse especially. The issues surrounding child abuse really is all, everyone wants it silenced. The abusers want it silenced so they can continue to do what they do. They don't want to do any jail time or be brought up on child abuse charges, right? So they want it silenced. Society wants it silenced because, no one wants to deal with it. It's a big, huge epidemic. It's a problem all around the world, and no one wants to deal with it. Well, there's a handful that do, and we're it, but, there's so many people that really don't care and don't want anything to do with it at all. It's too painful, and they wouldn't even know where to start. And families quite often want abuse silenced because they don't want the shame and the stigma of, people knowing about their dirty little secrets that go on behind the closed doors and, that no one knows about until someone starts speaking out like myself. And so, that's the whole issue with child abuse. It's always silenced. And, thank God for these people that actually print the child abuse headlines and articles in the newspapers. I thank God for them every day. For bringing out the stories, these true stories about children who are dying at the hands of their caregivers and parents and other, child sexual predators and whatnot, and children who are in the hospital due to abuse-related injuries. And thank God for people who are covering these stories and actually printing them and getting them out to the public, because we need to see what's happening. So many years ago that would have never happened. There would be nothing talked about in the paper, nothing on the news, nothing on the radio about child abuse because it was all kept hushed up, right? Well, there's too many voices speaking out now, and I'm one of them, and so I'm glad to be able to do these shows. So you have to listen at your own discretion. I talk about everything regarding abuse of any kind. So if you're sensitive to the topics of abuse, you might want to turn the show off. You have to listen at your own discretion, please. And if you're a young person under the age of 18, I'm fighting to save children's lives, and I know there's so many people out there who are doing that every day, fighting to keep you alive. And you have to do the same for yourself. You have to be careful what you're doing online. There are, at any given time, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of child sexual predators online at any time trying to get a hold of children. So you have to learn how to protect yourself. Make sure you have an adult who knows what you're doing online, knows what you're listening to, and especially if you're a young child, And, my shows are ultimately about stopping child abuse and for child rights. But there's a lot of adult content on them, and I'm just not sure how young the people are who are listening to my show. So if you're a young person, you might want to have someone just listen to the show with you And that way you can, they can help you determine whether or not you should be listening to the show, right? And then you can get help if you have questions and you're just not sure where to go to get the answers. They can maybe help you find the answers, right? So that's the important thing. Abuse is not talked about a whole lot, and so it could be scary for young people to listen to, and that's why I hope you would have a parent who cares, which I know quite often we don't. But if you do, which would be wonderful, you could have a parent or a caregiver sit in with you and listen to a show just to see if it's something that you really should be listening to, okay? So we're going to get right on with this article. I found this article on childwelfare.gov, and it's called Child Abuse and Neglect User Manual Series. It's called A Coordinated Response to Child Abuse and Neglect. The Foundation for Practice. Now, this is a huge PDF. It's 114 pages long. I downloaded it. I'm looking through it. There's all kinds of information on here. It's put out by U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, Administration on Children, Youth and Families, Children's Bureau, and Office on Child Abuse and Neglect. And it's really intensive. There's all kinds of great information here. It's from 2003, but it's kind of one of the more updated articles and PDFs actually relating to child abuse, child neglect, child maltreatment, right? And they talk about, like, what is child maltreatment? What are the philosophical tenets of child protection? What is the scope of the problem? What factors contribute to child abuse and neglect? And what are the consequences of child abuse and neglect? And it goes on to talk about what can be done to prevent child abuse and neglect, and which laws and policies guide public intervention in child maltreatment. What does the child protection process look like, and who should be involved in child protection at the community level, and how can organizations work together to protect children, and then end notes. So it's a huge article. And so I thought we'd just kind of look through it and just touch on a few points. You can go and get that for yourself at www.childwelfare.gov and /pubs, P-U-B-S, /user manuals, /foundation, /foundation again, it's foundation.pdf. And it's a great resource. I really like it. I just came across it here tonight, and I thought, well, this is really good. There's some different information there to look at, and I thought, why not take a look at it? We can't talk about abuse enough. That's why I'm doing these shows, right? We have to talk about it, or it will never change, right? Now, purpose and overview, it says, Chapter 1, Child Abuse and Neglect is a community concern. Each community has a legal and moral obligation to promote the safety, permanency, and well-being of children, which includes responding effectively to child maltreatment. I'm actually reading right from the page here. It says, at the state and local levels, professionals assume various roles and responsibilities ranging from prevention, identification, and reporting of child maltreatment to intervention, assessment, and treatment. Child Protective Services, CPS agencies, along with law enforcement, play a central role in receiving and investigating reports of child maltreatment. To protect children from harm, CPS also relies on community members to identify and report suspected cases of child maltreatment, including physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, and psychological maltreatment. Many community professionals, including healthcare providers, mental health professionals, educators, and legal and court system personnel, are involved in responding to child abuse and neglect and providing needed services. In addition, community-based agency staff, substance abuse treatment providers, domestic violence victim advocates, clergy, extended family members, and concerned citizens also play important roles in supporting families and keeping children safe. It says this manual, the first in the series, provides an overview of the problem of child abuse and neglect and the prevention and intervention processes. It describes not only the activities involved in child protection, but also the roles and responsibilities of various community members in conducting these activities and working collaboratively. It is intended to provide the basic information that professionals and the public need to become involved in and enhance their community's response to child maltreatment. While the manual is comprehensive in scope, it touches on major issues. It cannot reflect all the detailed information related to this complex problem. It is intended, therefore, as a starting point. And it says the manual answers the following 10 questions. What are the philosophical tenets of child protection? What is child maltreatment? What is the scope of the problem? What factors contribute to abuse and neglect? And what are the consequences of abuse and neglect? What can be done to prevent abuse and neglect? Which laws and policies guide public intervention in child maltreatment? What does the child protection process look like? and who should be involved in child protection at the community level, and how can organizations work together to protect children. So that's what this PDF download actually addresses, and it's really good. I hope everybody who's interested in child rights and stopping child abuse will take a look at it. And I'm just going to scroll down here. We're just going to go back, go up a little bit further, and I want to go to the section. I actually just saw this a little bit ago. Chapter 3, what is child maltreatment? It says, this is page 20 of this PDF download. It says, to prevent and respond to child abuse and neglect effectively, there needs to be a common understanding of the definitions of those actions and omissions that constitute child maltreatment. Unfortunately, there is no single universally applied definition of child abuse and neglect. Over the past several decades, different stakeholders, including state and federal legislative bodies, agency officials, and researchers, have developed definitions of maltreatment for different purposes. Definitions vary across these groups and within them. For example, legal definitions describing the different forms of child maltreatment for reporting and criminal prosecution purposes are found mainly in state statutes, and definitions vary from state to state. Similarly, agency guidelines for accepting reports, conducting investigations, and providing interventions may vary from state to state and sometimes from county to county. It says, in addition, researchers use varying methods to measure and define abuse and neglect, making it difficult to compare findings across studies. And despite the differences, there are commonalities across definitions. And this chapter describes sources of definitions in federal and state laws, and summarizes these elements commonly recognized as child maltreatment. So that's the thing, it just depends on what state you're in and what county you're in as to what the definition of child abuse really is. And that's what, we really need a universal, sort of a universal definition of exactly what child maltreatment, child neglect, and child abuse is, right? Definitions in federal law. It says the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, CAPTA, provides minimum standards for defining physical child abuse, child neglect, and sexual abuse that states must incorporate in their statutory definitions to receive federal funds. Under CAPTA, child abuse and neglect means any recent act, or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker that results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation. And another one is an act or failure to act that presents an imminent risk of serious harm. So it's an act or failure to act, right, that presents an imminent risk of serious harm. And the definition of child abuse and neglect refers specifically to parents and other caregivers. A child under this definition generally means a person who is under the age of 18 or who is not an emancipated minor. In cases of child sexual abuse, a child is one who has not attained the age of 18 or the age specified by the child protection law of the state in which the child resides, whichever is younger. So yeah, each state's different, right? While CAPTA provides definitions for sexual abuse and the special cases related to withholding or failing to provide medically indicated treatment, it does not provide specific definitions for other types of maltreatment, physical abuse, neglect, or psychological maltreatment. And then they go on here to describe sexual abuse, CAPTA's description of sexual abuse, and withholding medical treatment and whatnot. I'll go ahead and read that out. It says, CAPTA defines sexual abuse as the employment, use, persuasion, inducement, enticement, or coercion of any child to engage in or assist any other person to engage in any sexually explicit conduct or simulation of such conduct for the purpose of producing a visual depiction of such conduct. And also the rape, and in cases of caretaker or familial relationships, statutory rape, molestation, prostitution, or other form of sexual exploitation of children or incest with children. So that's how CAPTA defines sexual abuse. And they also define withholding medical treatment. CAPTA definition of withholding of medically indicated treatment. CAPTA defines the withholding of medically indicated treatment as the failure to respond to the infant's life-threatening conditions by providing treatment, which, in the treating physician's reasonable medical judgment, will be most likely to be effective in ameliorating, that's a big word, or correcting all such conditions. And also, the term withholding of medically indicated treatment does not include the failure to provide treatment other than appropriate nutrition, hydration, and medication to an infant when, in the treating physician's reasonable medical judgment the infant is chronically or irreversibly comatose, the provision of such treatment would merely prolong dying, and the provision of such treatment would not be effective in ameliorating or correcting all the infant's life-threatening conditions. And the provision of such treatment would otherwise be futile in terms of the survival of the infant, and the provision of such treatment would be virtually futile in terms of the survival of the infant, and the treatment itself under such circumstances would be inhumane. So it's really quite interesting, like what they've actually defined, this stuff as. You know what I mean? It's quite, we don't quite often hear this stuff and see this stuff out there in mainstream, the whole mainstream media, whether it's the newspaper or TV or whatever, right? Television. So it's quite interesting to see what they actually deem to be the actual definitions of this stuff, right? And they go on to talk about sources of definitions in state law and all kinds of stuff like that. You can read down through there. General definitions by types of maltreatment. Here's where I want to just kind of get into, because we can't talk about this stuff enough, right? Especially the different forms and types of child abuse. It's very important for people to know the signs and symptoms of child abuse. I mean, you could have a child living right next door to you, and if you're not aware of the signs and symptoms of all the different types of child abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, psychological, verbal, emotional, then you would not be able to help that child, right? Because that child is not. Most children do not disclose abuse. They're threatened at home quite often. They're told, if you tell, I will kill you. They might just not tell because they don't want to be removed from their home, which was my case. They might not tell because they love their parents. You know what I mean? And they truly love their parents, but the abuse is still happening. There's many reasons why children will not disclose abuse. And sometimes it's out of fear, and sometimes it's just plain that they just love their family and they're willing to just deal with what their family deals to them in order to keep to be able to stay with the family. And that happens, because that's what happened in my case. So it's very, very important to know what to look for, so that if you suspect abuse, you can make a phone call. If the child is safe within the home, they will not remove the child. And I mean, I know that there's probably cases out there. I'm sure of it. I just know it, because there's no perfect system anywhere. That children have been removed from their homes, right, in error, that they shouldn't have been. And I also know that lots and lots of children don't get removed from homes and are killed by their caregivers and parents. Actually, more children are killed by their parents and caregivers than get removed accidentally or by error. So, that just tells you, right, we have to do the right thing. We have to get children help. If you suspect abuse, you have to do the right thing and make the phone call. And you could save that child's life, right? So that's why I really stress this stuff on my shows, to get the education, to learn what the signs and symptoms are, to learn how to report it, and, do the right thing, help that child out, right, no matter how you can. It says there are 4 commonly recognized forms of child abuse or maltreatment: physical, sexual, neglect, and psychological. And I'm just reading from the page here now, there is great variation from state to state regarding the details and specificity of child abuse definitions, but it is still possible to identify commonalities among each different type of child maltreatment. These commonalities in part reflect societal views of parental actions that are seen as improper or unacceptable because they place children at a risk of physical and emotional harm. So physical abuse, right, it places the child at risk of physical and emotional harm, right? Anything that harms a child is abuse. Physical abuse intentionally. We're talking anything that is intentionally done to harm a child is abuse. Physical abuse. General physical abuse is characterized by physical injuries such as bruises and fractures that result from, and they list here, punching, beating, kicking, biting, shaking, throwing, stabbing, choking, hitting with a hand, stick, strap, or other object, burning, and they go on to talk, although an injury resulting from physical abuse is not accidental, the parent or caregiver may not have intended to hurt the child. The injury may have resulted from severe discipline, including injurious spanking or physical punishment that is inappropriate to the child's age or condition. The injury may be the result of a single episode or of repeated episodes that can range in severity from minor marks and bruising to death, right? And that's just the whole issue, right? I mean, I know there's lots of times parents lash out at their children. They don't mean to hurt them, but they end up hurting them anyway. And then after that, it becomes very easy to strike that child. The first time they do it, they might be upset, The parent might think, well, I shouldn't have done that, it could have hurt my child. And then when the child acts up again, they use the same means to try to get that child to straighten up, but they use it a little bit harder. So they smack the kid again a little bit harder, right? Or shake the child a little bit harder. And, that can kill a child, right? Shaking baby syndrome is absolutely, completely detrimental to a child's health. It will kill a child, and if they don't die from it, they'll just spend their whole lives in a wheelchair. And those parents that do that, they don't even realize what they're doing. They don't realize that by shaking that child, the baby's neck is not built, the muscles are not built up. So the child cannot hold their head, and their head just rolls around, lolls around. It can break the child's neck, and the brain, can get loose and start banging on the insides of the head. Causes all kinds of problems, and physical problems and psychological problems and everything else, right? So and parents just don't think. They just grab their child and shake them, right? And they're not thinking properly, right? And that's the whole issue. I think some parents probably do abuse their children and don't mean to, and whether they ever feel bad about it, I don't know. I know that my parents were very abusive, and they never felt bad about it. So it can happen. There's lots of abusive parents out there that do not have any remorse and are perfectly happy kicking the crap out of their kids. But the thing is we know there's some out there that probably have hurt their children and didn't mean to. But that's the whole issue. We have to stop this, really, we do, because children don't deserve that. It doesn't matter how badly your child is acting up, they don't deserve that. There's nothing a child could do that could warrant abuse like that. There's better ways to parent. There's better ways to cope. And it says, some cultural practices are generally not defined as physical abuse, but may result in physically hurting children. For example, coining. And they go on to talk about some of this stuff. Coining, or kaujio, a practice to treat illness by rubbing the body forcefully with a coin or other hard object. I've never heard of that. Moxobustion, which is an Asian folkloric remedy that burns the skin. And the different traditions from different backgrounds, people that have been doing these things for thousands of years, right? We would consider abuse, and they think it's just some sort of a way to help their children. So, it's really trippy, how people think and feel about abuse, right? It says, as Howard Dubowitz, a leading researcher in the field, explains, while cultural practices are generally respected, if the injury or harm is significant, professionals typically work with parents to discourage harmful behavior and suggest preferable alternatives. And then they talk about sexual abuse here. Child sexual abuse generally refers to sexual acts, sexually motivated behaviors involving children, or sexual exploitation of children. Child sexual abuse includes a wide range of behaviors such as, and they go on to list these, and this is very sensitive, so if you don't want to listen to this, you might want to turn this right off. I'm not, I study this, and this is what I do, and I will protect children and for the rest of my life and try to stop child abuse. So I'm not, uncomfortable talking about it. But I know if you're very sensitive to the whole issue of child sexual abuse, you might want to turn this off. Okay? They talk about oral, anal, or genital penile penetration, anal or genital, digital, or other penetration, genital contact with no intrusion, fondling of children's breasts or buttocks, indecent exposure, inadequate or inappropriate supervision of a child's voluntary sexual activities. And they go on, they say here, use of a child in prostitution, pornography, internet crimes, or other sexually exploitive activities. So sexual abuse includes both touching offenses, fondling or sexual intercourse, and non-touching offenses, exposing a child to pornographic materials, and can involve varying degrees of violence and emotional trauma. The most commonly reported cases involve incest, sexual abuse occurring among family members, including those in biological families, adoptive families, and stepfamilies. Incest most often occurs within a father-daughter relationship. However, mother-son, father-son, and sibling-sibling incest also occurs. And this is the fact, it does happen, and it's very sad, very unfortunate, and it's actually very common. Sexual abuse is also sometimes committed by other relatives or caregivers, such as aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, or a boyfriend or girlfriend, or of a parent. And that's just the truth. It's sexual abuse of children. It happens wherever the child is. And 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys, this is me talking now, just from all the research that I do, 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be abused sexually under the age of 18 in some way, whether it's unwanted sexual touching or, the sexual abuse, right? So 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys. And that's a fact. There's probably more. It's just that, a lot of abuse is not disclosed. We don't hear about, it's not always reported. So this is the what we have based on the numbers that we have. 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused under the age of 18, and that's the stats all the way across the board. And wherever the children are, that's where the abuse is happening. So, whether it's a family friend, a relative, mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, uncle or aunt, it's someone in the family or a close relative. 90 to 95%, just depending on where you look at your stats, 90 to 95% of all child sexual abuse is perpetrated by someone the child knows. So the other 5 to 10% is a random act, someone who gets a hold of the child outside of the home, whether it's at school or daycare or child sexual predator on the street. That's 5 to 10%. The other 90 to 95% is a family member or a family friend, someone the child knows and trusts. That's who is abusing your child. If your child's being sexually abused, it will be most likely someone that you know in the family. It will be happening in the home or where your child is during the day or night. And so that's why it's so important for parents to realize this and stop hiding behind a bunch of, protective garbage like, oh, this could never happen in my home. This would never happen to my child. This couldn't be possibly happening under my nose, because it could be, and it can be, and it does. So make sure that you know what to look for regarding the signs and symptoms of child sexual abuse, so you can protect your own child from being abused sexually. And make sure that you know where your child is. Do not just leave your child with a stranger, ever. And even a family member, check up on your family members. This happens to people, and they bust family members abusing their children all the time, sexually abusing children. And, it's just amazing how many perverts there really are out there and how many sick and twisted people there are. But 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are abused sexually under the age of 18, and I'm one of them. So, this just there's a lot of sick people out there, and they are family members. They are your family members. They're my family members. And just because they're family doesn't mean that they're not a child sexual predator. They're not going to come out and say, hey, I'm a child sexual predator. Can I watch your kid for the afternoon? You know what I mean? They're going to come across very trustworthy. They're going to say, hey, I'll watch your kids, no problem, Cousin Joe or Aunt Jane, And they're going to be more than happy to watch your kids because they want to have access to your child so they can sexually abuse them. It could be your stepfather, could be your own father, could be, anybody. So really, people pay attention. It is quite often, 90 to 95% often, a family member. So get a grip and realize that your child could be being abused in your own home right under your nose. Start looking for the signs and symptoms and be very aware that where your child is, that's where the abuse will happen. You can protect your child from being sexually abused, and I think that is number one important. Children come first, and protecting children should come first in a parent's, any parent's mind. Right? They owe this child, they owe their children that much, right, to protect them from abuse. And so, make sure you do get your children some help. If there is abuse going on, don't just blow it off. My mom just told me it was my problem and I was going to have to deal with it, and she did not get me any help. And so, just because she didn't want to send the family member to jail, because they would have gone to jail probably. And so, see, a lot of times they don't want to do that. They'd rather let Uncle Joe or Aunt Jane or somebody in the family stick around instead of pressing charges, right? When that child deserves to be protected, right? And that person should do time, because they could go on to abuse other children. Not just that one child. They could go on to abuse more children if they get away with it. So that's the thing. It's very important to know the signs and symptoms. So we'll continue on with this on Friday night. Thanks very much for joining in. And it's a great article. You can find it at www.childwelfare.gov/pubs/user manuals/foundation/foundation.pdf. And I'll be back on tomorrow morning, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, 6 o'clock a.m. in the morning. And and until then, have a great day, everybody. Just, if you need any information or resources, get a hold of me on Blog Talk Radio here or Facebook. And Elizabeth Brawley will be on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I hope you will tune in for her show. Thanks, everybody, and we'll be talking to you real soon. Bye-bye.